It's not broken, it's just stubborn. High-Commander Vrex stared at the diagnostic display, his primary hearts beating a slow, funereal rhythm against his ribs. The message was crisp, polite, and absolute. Quantum variance 0.04%. System lock engaged to prevent catastrophic unraveling. He was going to die here, adrift in the deep void, encased in the finest dreadnought the Aethelgardian fleet had ever constructed, all because of a rounding error. Vrex smoothed the iridescent scales along his forearm, a nervous tick that caused them to ripple from a commanding emerald to a terrified pale slate. The silence of the ship was heavy, a suffocating blanket of high-tech perfection. The air was scrubbed so clean it tasted of nothing. Then came the thud. It wasn't the sleek, magnetic kiss of a docking ring. It was a metal-on-metal crunch, a shudder that vibrated through the floor plates and up into Vrex's delicate sensory spines. He spun around, his dorsal ridge flaring in defensive instinct, just as the manual override on the port airlock screamed in protest. The door didn't slide open with a hiss. It groaned. A creature stepped through. It was bipedal, soft-skinned, and draped in a garment of oil-stained synthetic fabric that hung loosely over its frame. A human. Vrex had studied them in the academy, a chaotic, frenetic species known for their terrifying adaptability and lack of exoskeleton. The human, a male with messy hair and a smudge of grease on his cheek, looked around the pristine, white-paneled engineering deck. He blinked, seemingly unimpressed by the hyper-advanced fusion loom humming in stasis before him. "Hey there," the human said. His voice was a low rumble, surprisingly resonant in the sterile room. "I picked up a distress beacon. I picked up a silence where a ship should be. Figured someone might be in trouble." Vrex straightened, trying to regain his composure, though his color was currently stuck on a confused lavender. "I am High-Commander Vrex of the Aethelgard. My vessel has suffered a critical quantum misalignment. Attempting to interface may cause a subspatial rupture. You should retreat for your own safety." The human, Mac, if the embroidered patch on his chest was to be believed, didn't retreat. Instead, he walked right past the shimmering containment field, his heavy boots leaving faint, muddy scuff marks on the nanomaterial floor. Vrex winced at the desecration. "Misalignment, huh?" Mac muttered. He wasn't looking at the holographic readouts floating in the air, swirling with millions of lines of error code. He was looking at the physical casing of the engine. He leaned in, placing a bare, fleshy hand against the vibrating metal housing. Vrex gasped. "Do not touch the casing. The thermal resonance is—" "It's cold," Mac interrupted. He tilted his head, his eyes closing for a second, as if he were listening to a secret whisper from the machine. "And it's tight. Too tight." This was culture shock in its rawest form. Vrex lived in a world where machines were mathematical theoreticals, governed by logic and managed by algorithms. To see this biological entity touch the engine with such casual intimacy was disturbing. It was also, confusingly, mesmerizing. The human's body temperature was radiating outward, a wave of mammalian heat that washed over Vrex's sensitive olfactory pits. It smelled of coffee, ozone, and something unmistakably organic. Vrex stepped closer, his curiosity overriding his protocol. "The variance is 0.04%. The AI will not allow ignition until the equation balances. It requires a level 9 technician and a complete core reboot." Mac finally looked at him. The human's eyes were soft, crinkling at the corners. There was no panic in them, only a strange, placid patience. "Buddy, the computer is overthinking it." Mac reached into a pouch at his hip. He didn't pull out a laser caliper or a quantum tuner. He pulled out a roll of silver adhesive fabric tape and a heavy battered wrench that looked like it had been used as a hammer more often than a turning tool. Vrex's scales flashed a warning orange. "That is archaic. What do you intend to do with primitive bonding strips?" Mac grinned, and the expression transformed his face. So it was disarming. Vrex felt his heart stutter, a biological reaction he couldn't catalog. "It's a 10-credit fix for a billion-credit ship," Mac said, unspooling a length of the silver tape with a ripping sound that echoed violently in the quiet room. "See? Your ship is scared. It thinks if it moves a millimeter, it blows up. It just needs to be held. Held? Vrex repeated, the concept failing to translate into technical syntax. Yeah, sometimes things just need to know they aren't going to fall apart. Terran empathy, I guess. We bond with anything. Dogs, cats, Roombas, warp drives. Mac patted the engine casing again, a gentle, rhythmic thumping. He walked around to the exposed manifold where the sensors were screaming about the variance. Vrex watched, paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of it. This human was ignoring the laws of physics in favor of feelings. He was treating the most advanced engine in the sector like a stubborn beast of burden. Mac raised the wrench. Vrex flinched. You cannot strike the core. The percussive impact will... Shh, Mac whispered, winking at the alien commander. I'm just having a conversation. The human didn't strike immediately. He ran his hand along the pipe, finding a spot that looked identical to every other spot. But Mac seemed to feel a difference. He hummed a low tune, a vibration that seemed to resonate with the low thrum of the standby power. It was the clash of high-tech anxiety against low-tech confidence. Vrex was paralyzed by the complexity of the problem. Mac was liberated by the simplicity of the solution. Tell you what, Mac said, looking back at Vrex, his voice dropping to a tone usually reserved for comforting a child. You look like you're about to molt from stress. Why don't you look away? I'm going to apply some percussive maintenance. It's a delicate procedure. Vrex found himself nodding, swayed by the human's absolute certainty. He didn't understand it. The manual said this was impossible. The math said they were dead. But the human was opening a roll of tape and weighing a wrench in his hand like a conductor raising a baton. It wasn't science. It was something older. It was the audacity of biology asserting dominance over technology. I trust your judgment, Vrex whispered, the lie tasting strange on his tongue. Max smiled again. Don't worry, Commander. We'll have her purring in a second. She just needs the human touch. Max swung the wrench. It wasn't a vicious strike. It was a sharp, calculated rap against the side of the fusion injector, a sound that rang out like a temple bell in the silence. Clang. Vrex flinched so hard his sensory spines rattled against his uniform collar. His scales drained of all color, leaving him a terrified, translucent gray. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the containment field to collapse, for the white-hot embrace of atomization. But the universe did not end. Instead, there was a groan from the machinery, a deep, metallic complaint that sounded almost indignant. Mac ignored the sound and leaned in closer, his face inches from the radioactive shielding. Come on, old girl, he murmured to the engine. Don't be like that. We've all had bad days. He raised the wrench again. Vrex opened one eye, his breath catching in his throat. Stop! Vrex squeaked, his voice cracking an octave higher than befitted a high commander. You are antagonizing the navigational matrix. She's listening, Mac corrected. He struck it again. Clang, harder this time, a little to the left. Suddenly, the angry red pulsing of the aerolights stuttered. The hum of the room changed pitch. It went from a jagged, anxious whine to a low, throaty rumble. The vibration in the floor plates smoothed out, transforming from a shudder into a steady, rhythmic throb. Mac nodded, satisfied. He holstered the wrench and peeled off a long strip of the silver tape. With the dexterity of a surgeon, he wrapped it around the junction where the sensor feed met the casing, pulling it taut until the fabric strained. There, he said, smoothing the edges down with a greasy thumb. That'll hold until you get to a space dock. Or for the next 50 years. It's the universal language of duct tape. Stick first, ask questions later. Vrex stared at the console. The holographic display flickered. The terrified red warnings vanished, replaced by a soothing, solid blue. System status, operational. Variance. Ignored. Ignored? Vrex whispered, moving to the console. His hands hovered over the controls, trembling slightly. The variance is still there. The math is still imperfect. But the system simply decided not to care. Mac wiped his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. See? It works. You guys get so wrapped up in the perfection of the numbers, you forget that machines have personalities. She didn't want to die. She just wanted someone to acknowledge that her intake valve was rattling. Vrex turned to look at the human. And Mac was leaning against the bulkhead, looking tired but pleased. The harsh lighting of the engineering deck caught the sweat on his forehead, making him shine. To Vrex, who came from a species that valued sterility and precision above all else, the human looked chaotic. He looked messy. He looked wonderful. Vrex felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a flush of color returning to his scales, deepening to a soft, admiring violet. This was the prompt he had missed in all his training, the missing variable. Humans didn't just fix things, they befriended them. They bullied and cajoled and hugged the universe into working. What algorithm did you use to calculate the strike point? Vrex asked, his voice soft. To know exactly where to apply force to bypass the sensor lockout? The quantum harmonics required for that calculation are... Mac chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. Algorithm? Buddy, I just hit it until it listened. He pushed off the wall and started gathering his tools. It's not about being perfect, Commander. It's about being stubborn enough to keep going, even when you're a little broken. That's how we survive. Vrex looked back at the engine, held together by a strip of silver adhesive and a human's sheer audacity. It hummed contentedly. It works, Vrex said, the realization settling over him like a warm cloak. Function over perfection. Exactly. Mac hoisted his toolkit. Now, I don't suppose a ship this fancy has a coffee machine. I've been running on salvage rations for 3 weeks. Vrex blinked, in his pupils dilating as his biology adjusted to the shift in atmosphere, from impending death to domestic tranquility. We have a nutrient synthesizer, Vrex said, stepping away from the console. He hesitated, then extended a hand, palm up, in a gesture he had seen in the human archives. It can attempt a molecular reconstruction of coffee. Mac looked at the alien's hand, sleek, scaled, and trembling ever so slightly, and then took it. The human's grip was warm, rough, and solid. I'd like that, Mac said. As they walked out of the engine room, leaving the billion-credit drive held together by 10 cents of tape, Vrex realized something. The human was right. The ship hadn't needed math. It had needed a touch. And perhaps, alone in the drift of the dark void, the High Commander had needed one too.